Maliseet Lewis. I am going to share with you some Maliseet language skills on what to think about when you're learning the language for the first time. Most people, when they want to learn a language, they try to translate the words immediately. That's not how we learn the language. What you have to learn is the melody of the language and how it sounds to you. And these are just some of the skills that I'm going to go over today. Tips for practicing your language skill. First one is listen to the melody. Each language has its own intonation patterns, rises, falls, pauses. You can listen to without even trying to catch the accent. Listen to the speakers when possible. Can you catch the emotional tone even though you don't understand the word? Like if they're excited, if they're frightened, if they're repeating something that's horrific, or and you could always tell just by the intonation of the words, and you can almost guess what it's about and stuff. So, but listen to the tone of the language. Our elders always teach us that Wolust of Maliseet is like the river. So when we pronounce our language, we say it like the river. So when you're trying to repeat words for the first time, then think of yourself as being the river. And because our language is like the river, it meanders at a really nice slow pace. Think sounds. Sounds, not the written words, since in many languages the way a word is pronounced may have little relation to its spelling. Work on those strange sounds which don't exist in English. And we do have like il and el as vowel blends that English doesn't have. Work on those strange sounds. Practice short phrases containing those difficult sounds. Unfortunately, a lot of times people want to make things and learn things the easiest way possible. We've always been taught that to teach yourself the most difficult things first, and then you do the easier ones after. So it's best for you to try to pronounce the most difficult words, the longest words first, and then you'll graduate down to the smaller ones. Watch people's faces for lip position on certain sounds. I know we have a cultural way of pointing, for example, and sometimes when elders are speaking, you'll hear them go like this, what the, yeah the. They're actually pointing, to what they're talking about or who they're talking about. So that's a good thing. So lip position is important, and we do point with our lips, which is very cultural for us. Learn phrases, not words. When yes, we start with words, but it's also important to put those words in phrases. Words seldom exist in isolation. You may not even be understood if you pronounce the language word by word, rather than running them together in appropriate breath groups. Dun ga lo gil. Instead of going dun, ga, lo gil. You want to say dun ga lo gil, and that way you hear the rhythm, and you want to try to pronounce it in that rhythm. Tape recorder, of course now, these are old notes from the 90s. There's no more tape recorders, I don't think. But use your iPhones, iPads for, recording to get short conversations you can listen to and repeat. And especially with technology today, I can see these new tools being used for that, so that you can play it over and over again. Practice on someone. What the most difficult thing about learning a language is, yes, you have it in your mind, and so you've memorized it, but you're so afraid to do the ultimate jump, which is saying it, because we're all afraid of mistakes. People are always so afraid to make mistakes, especially adults. Children, it's natural. If they don't say the word right, it's no big concern to them. Us adults, we want to be so perfect, so precise the very first time, and we all know that's impossible to achieve. So be ready to make mistakes so that you can learn from them. So practice on someone. Learn a new phrase, find someone to try it out on. Embarrassed about starting a conversation? Try talking to children. It's easier. And trust me, they're good listeners, and they'll try to repeat it as well. Practice asking people what their name is and greeting them in Maliseet, especially elders who are looking forward to hearing bits of their language. So it's really important to use what you're learning and not to store it in your mind. Make it a point that every day you use it, whether you're going to the grocery store or you're at a restaurant and you want to be able to say, "Good Wilson, could I have something to drink, please?" Or "Good could I have the menu, please?" You know, "Liwan, thank you for bringing my food to me," because it needs to be out there. So practice asking people what their name is. Take some risks. Risk making friends from other Maliseet communities. Ask questions in Maliseet. How do you say this in the language? Ask questions in Maliseet. Be curious. Be brave enough to ask for language corrections once you know a Maliseet speaker. That's humility. It's a good lesson and a good way to learn a language is to be humble to begin with and know that you don't know every word in the dictionary, but that you're willing to start your learning curve, to build on it. I'm a speaker and I don't know every word. Sometimes people will come up to me and say, "Well, how do you say nuclear waste management organization?" And it took a while, but I did go to the elders and I was brave enough to say, "Well, how would you say nuclear waste? How would you say electricity? How would you say computer?" And so that's humility. But I learn because I'm willing to admit that I don't know every word there is. So be brave in asking those questions. Go ahead, read and write. There's been lots of, arguments of should we write it, should we not. I myself wanted to learn how to read and write it as soon as I knew that it was written. Now, I did have to jump through over a lot of hurdles. One being, my elders didn't want me to learn how to read it because they felt if we read it and it was in a system, then it could be taken away from us again. And I believed in it for a while until I realized, how else are we going to save it? If we don't have enough speakers, and we know, all of us are aware, we lose many, many speakers annually and daily. And so if we lose our speakers, how are we going to save our language? So reading is one of the ways that we can leave it behind for the ones not yet born. And so reading was an honor to do. Read Maliseet materials. You can go online now, and there's actually things that are written that the museums have put together. There's books that are being written. There's one particular I love to read. It's called The 13 Moons, that Elder David Francis and Robert Levitt translated from in English to Passamaquoddy. That's a wonderful book to try to read from. Attempt to label items in your home. When we were brought up with speaking the language, we never got to see our language. Today, in my home, at St. Mary's, for example, I confused the postman at the beginning because I had Olowiganuk instead of the number 7 for my post office box, and he assumed that the Olowiganuk family, which means number 7, were living there, and he says, "Who's this family?" And I said, "Oh, that's the number 7 in Maliseet." But so that's what we have to do, is we have to make our language visible and label the door, label the rooms, label items in your kitchen, so that no matter whatever room you go to, you can see your language. I had a student one time that did a wonderful thing. What she did is she would learn 10 words a week And then the following week, she'd take those 10 words and put them in a sentence. And what she did for herself and her children, she put them on her blind, so that at night before they went to bed, a half hour before they went to bed, they would spend time practicing those words. And so the whole family was learning. And then once they knew them well, then they would put new words, and I just thought that was a wonderful way to, as a family, to learn the language. So labeling is good. Try to associate the written words with what you have heard. If you're learning those 10 words, for example, then try to listen for those 10 words. That's why food items are good, clothing items are good to learn. How to set the table is a good way to learn, because you do that every day. Try to make it as functional as possible. Carry a notebook to write down new phrases or expressions as soon as you hear them. Then use them to communicate an idea of your own. Now, that's really good to know, and even though you may not know how to write it yet, do it phonetically for now, how it sounds to you. But eventually, you'll know how to read and write it. Observe the nonverbal communication. There is much more to communicating than sounds, words, and the structures of Maliseet. Sometimes you see how elders speak. For example, when an elder is telling a story, and we're so used to filling up space, that silence makes people uncomfortable. Sometimes when you're asking a question and the elder doesn't respond to you right away, you think the elder didn't hear me. But what the elder is really doing is giving you the best answer back. So it takes some thinking, it takes some silence while the thought process is doing, especially if you're asking how do you translate something from one language to another. We don't have a system in place where we can just automatically translate it from English to Maliseet. We have to have a thought process, because some things can't be directly translated from English to Maliseet. And so, for example, years ago there was a teacher that I had asked her, how would you translate medicine wheel teachings? And because of her training, she thought I was asking how do you literally translate medicine wheel teachings to Maliseet. And she said, Pizun, Wakalux, Gakid Wagano, which literally means medicine of any kind, a wheel on a car, and teachings were what you learn in school. And so that's an example of what happens when we translate directly from one language to another. How I translate it today is, what's the concept of medicine wheel teachings? And the concept is, it's good medicine for all of humanity to live in harmony with all of creation. So how do we say that? Wuli Bamal Sawagano. Wuli Bamal Sawagano. And it literally means following a sacred path of life. That's what medicine wheel teachings are. So see what I'm saying about the translating? So when you're speaking to an elder and asking them to translate something, give them that honor of pauses, especially veterans. When veterans are talking about their World War II experiences, there might be 5 minutes they won't say anything because of either a bad experience, pain of remembering, and how do they respond if they're going to respond. So you need to honor their decision, whether they're going to tell you or not. And but it's always worth waiting for, because when they do share, they're sharing a memory. It's almost as if they're taking you back to that time. Like all the veterans that I've interviewed, I feel like I'm a veteran because of their stories. I feel like I've been in those trenches. I feel like I faced the enemy. I felt like I faced those decisions, what it must have been like to have to protect your country. you know. And so I, even though I didn't go there, I feel like I've been there because I've been gifted with being able to communicate with my veterans. So so there's much more to communicating, you know, besides just sounds and words and structures. You need to know culturally appropriate ways. When an elder looks away from you and doesn't look you in the eye, it's very cultural for us. We don't look each other in the eye because it's almost as if we're trying to see inside of each other, and that's not culturally appropriate. So you'll see elders look away as they're telling the story, and you're wondering, geez, they're ignoring me. They're not even looking at me, but that's not true. What the elder is doing is being able to concentrate because they're not distracted by, you know, your eyes and your questions, etc. What they need to do is to just kind of look away and they'll start telling their story. Sometimes they'll close their eyes. Doesn't mean they're sleeping. It just means they're just going back to the place where you're asking them. And so honor those culturally appropriate ways. And as I mentioned before, pointing, you know, and also gifting. That's one thing that we don't do enough of is when we come to go visit our elders, we're supposed to bring them a gift. You're never supposed to be empty-handed when you visit your elder. It could be a souvenir cup from where, say, you went on a trip somewhere. Could be a pin. You'll see lots of elders that collect pins on their hats and on their vests. You know, it could be a pin from somewhere. It could be, if maple syrup is in season, bring them a fresh bottle of maple syrup. If it's tobacco they need, you know, bring them a pouch of tobacco. But you never ever visit an elder without a gift. And once you do that, you've opened up the lines of really good communication. So that's one of the cultural ways I think that are missing sometimes. We take them for granted, and so we need to treat them as royally as they should be. How do people interrupt each other when they take turns talking? And you'll see that. You'll see if an elder is speaking, a younger person would never interrupt that elder, you know, while the elder is speaking. So we do have a cultural way of whose turn it is to speak. The eldest one, the elders in training, the adults, and then the children. Now, granted, we're always said that you listen to children as well. When it's listening to the children, the elders will say, well, let's listen to what the children have to say first. Then it'll go up the ladder again, the children, the youth, the adults, and then the elder will speak at the end. So that's really important on, with interruptions, and observe that. Who speaks first? For us, we always ask the elder to speak first, but there'll be times when the elder feels, I'd rather listen to what's expected than by listening to everybody else first. So usually there's always a facilitator, and then different people that will then speak. But listen to even in homes, do the fathers speak before the mothers? Culturally, sometimes it's paternalistic and sometimes it's matrilineal. But observe that in the places you go to and see what the rules are in that particular community. How do they show respect? And one of the ways is by not asking too many questions while they're deep in thought. You can ask those questions afterwards. Not keeping them sitting too long. You can't be there for 2 hours straight and not expect, that's not showing respect, that's actually elder abuse. You're supposed to just give them a short time, ask them if they want something to drink. Are you sure you're okay with this? You want to take a break, we'll come back to it later, instead of being time constraining and, nope, gotta do this, it's gotta be done, etc. So one way to show respect is to let the elder kind of tell you how their communication preferences are, or what their communication preferences are. How do they show authority? When we're looking at speakers, One way, of course, is if you're sitting down and an elderly person walks in, most everybody will stand up for that elder in the same way you would see it done in public when the lieutenant governor enters. Everybody's expected to rise. But in our culture, we're not told to. Whereas, in the English culture, they'll tell you, please rise. We don't have to, because we know already that elder deserves the honor of standing up for that elder. So that's a way of showing authority. What gestures do you use, and can you tell what they mean? We use hands a lot, and neget bicha, and you'll see that, and you'll see frowning and all kinds of really beautiful facial expressions on elders when they're telling a beautiful story of long ago. You'll, especially when they tell jokes, they won't laugh right away. They want to see first if you get it, And what they'll do is they'll just kind of, they'll tell their joke and they'll be silent just because they're waiting for whether you get it or not. And, and then they'll let you know that, oh, looks like you didn't get it because you didn't laugh. So watch their gestures and you'll see their smiles start to break and stuff, but their facial expressions are really beautiful. But, those are those nonverbal communications you want to learn about. Is there a difference between man to man speaking, woman to woman, elder to child? Yes, there is. I learned at a very young age because I was repeating what my uncle was saying. And I repeated the way that I spoke to my grandmother, and she says, "Where did you hear that? That's not for women to say, that's for men to say, not for women to say." And I didn't know there would be differences. And even how we speak, one of the things that I really notice, that has changed in my lifetime is how we speak to children. I was brought up in an era where you didn't raise your voice to anybody. And when I taught at the Fredericton High School, I witnessed teachers calling at their students, and it threw me because I never observed that. So I was shocked by that way of communicating. And so there is a difference in how you speak to others. You're not supposed to raise your voice. And I think maybe that's what Maliseet means, is that slow murmuring, or there's a difference between elder to child. After all this, go practice. Stay tuned in to Maliseet as many hours a day as possible, alternating between observation and listening, and actively practicing with anyone who will cooperate. You will be surprised how quickly you can communicate. And remember, communication is more than just saying lists of words. Communication is recognizing facial expressions, honoring the silence in between the story or those pauses, looking for sounds of the language when there's when somebody is telling a story of something